Hello. Bassanio. Now, would we regard him as a major character in this play? I think you should. Without Bassanio's love for Portia, there isn't really much of a play. So I think we should treat him very seriously and make sure that we revise some of the key quotations for him. I think you can use Bassanio to write about friendship. I think you can write about love. I think you can write about money, and I think you can write about power. And so most of the quotations I'm going to take you through look at those four key areas. So we begin with Bassanio talking about his situation. That which I owe, and he means to you, is lost. He's got nothing. But if you please to shoot another arrow that self-same way which you did shoot the first. Here he's got this idea that he's not really going to shoot any arrows. This is simply about the idea that if Antonio lends him more money, he thinks he can reclaim any of the money lost. In other words, this one final try to try and marry, to get close to Portia, and use the riches to appeal to her will mean that they can become rich, or he will become rich and pay back Antonio anything that he's borrowed. The interesting thing that he does talk about arrows, and you use arrows to hunt, and so we've got this kind of idea of hunting Portia, this strange idea that he's on the hunt for somebody. For this second quote, Bassanio is talking for the first time about Portia. And so we really learn about her through Bassanio. He says, in Belmont is a lady richly left, and she is fair and fairer than that word, of wondrous virtues. So he's talking about her wealth, he's talking about her beauty, and he's talking about her personality, her virtues, what she's really like. Notice he starts with, well, frankly, he starts with the money. She's richly left. Her father has left her a great deal of money. And it's worth noticing that. That's the thing he starts with, and he ends with her personality. Here we have Bassanio telling Antonio just why it is he thinks he stands a chance with this rich, beautiful woman. He's penniless, but he says, sometimes from her eyes I did receive fair speechless messages. This is ambiguous. That means we're not really sure, but it would seem that she is communicating with him without talking, by looking. So ideally, you'd be thinking about the way that these two have been communicating by just looking at each other and trying somehow to communicate their love for one another. Or, because it is ambiguous, Bassanio's got it completely wrong. Because this is early in the play, we as the audience don't really know. He may not stand a chance. So we know that Antonio goes and helps Bassanio to find the money that he needs. We know that he has to go to Shylock, and we know that he strikes a deal, a bond with Shylock. But here in this quotation, you shall not seal such a bond for me, I'll rather dwell in my necessity, sees Bassanio ordering, you shall not, that's an order, isn't it? You shall not seal, this idea of fixing something. You shall not seal a bond for me. He doesn't want his friend to do this. He feels that this is something that could lead to danger, that could lead to trouble, and he'd rather his friend doesn't do it. And this idea that he'd rather dwell in his necessity kind of just means that he's going to keep things as they are. Bassanio continues to be worried about the deal, the bond that Antonio has struck up with Shylock. He says, I like not fair terms in a villain's mind. Shylock has laid out the deal as if it is fair terms. Everything is fine. However, Bassanio believes that Shylock is not trustworthy, that he's in fact a villain, and the mind of a villain will set something else to look like it is fair, like it's something that everybody should accept. And it's the key word not, he says, I like not. This is an example of post-modification, to change something later on in the sentence. I like, and then you get the word not. I like not. He is very unhappy about this, and he's worried that his friend is being tricked. This next quotation is a quotation from the messenger who comes to Portia to introduce the arrival of Bassanio shortly after the failure of the second suitor. The messenger says, I have not seen so likely an ambassador of love. A day in April never came so sweet. Well, clearly this is an example of exaggeration, and another word for that, of course, is hyperbole. This is a description of Bassanio. He is the likely ambassador of love. He is love itself coming to visit. And this idea of April is spring, and spring of course brings about change and growth and things growing. So Shakespeare's using the seasons to suggest that things are about to change and grow. Bassanio is prone to exaggeration as well. He says, "Let me choose, for as I am, I live upon the rack." He doesn't actually live upon the rack, but what he means is that he's being tortured. He feels like he's being tortured, that he's in physical pain, because all he wants to do is open the casket and get on with his choice. The next couple of quotations are about Bassanio choosing and thinking carefully about which of the caskets to choose in order to win Portia. And this quotation, "So may the outward shows be least themselves, the world is still deceived with ornament," is him thinking and basically doing completely the opposite of the last two suitors, Morocco and Aragon, by thinking about what's within and not what's on the outside. So he's not interested in gold or silver, because he's saying that the world is deceived with ornament, that it's not about what's on the outside, ornaments, but it's what's on the inside. Bassanio says, "Thou meagre lead, which rather threatenest than dost promise aught, thy paleness moves me more than eloquence." It's quite a long quote and it's quite complicated, but actually what he's saying is that he's considering her, this casket, as a person. It's personification. Thou meagre lead, you. He's talking to the casket as if it's real. Thy paleness. He's talking about the dullness of the box, the casket, compared to the gold and the silver which the other two suitors picked. But he's kind of saying those are not interesting. He knows that this is the box that is interesting and should be the one that he opens, because it moves him. Notice the word, thy paleness moves me more than eloquence, more than something finer, more than something that is carefully constructed. He quite likes the boringness of this one, or so he says. I'd like you to think that that's probably what you'd need to say in order to impress Portia. In this quotation, Bassanio begins to realise the full cost of what he's achieved. He tells Portia, "I've engaged myself to a dear friend," that's Antonio, "engaged my friend to his mere enemy," that of course is Shylock, and he says, "to feed my means," in other words, to get what I want. I think he's beginning to feel a little bit guilty. He's having to explain to Portia just how he's managed to get where he is today. Now this next quote is quite long. I'm not sure you need to remember all of it, but I'd like you to at least think that what's going on in it is that Bassanio is exaggerating again. Another example of hyperbole. They mean the same thing. "The dearest friend to me, the kindest man, the best conditioned and unwearied spirit in doing courtesies." In other words, he's really desperate for Portia to understand just how loving he feels Antonio is towards him, and he's trying to communicate that to her, but I think he goes a little bit over the top. I think his emotions are running away with him here, and he's saying things that are exaggerated. So for our next quotation, the context has changed. We're in court now, and Bassanio is basically offering himself as a replacement for Antonio. "The Jew shall have my flesh, blood, bones and all, ere thou shalt lose for me one drop of blood." Here we can see that he's quite happy to replace Antonio. However, it's never going to happen. This is an empty gesture. This is not something that the court will take seriously. Just notice the slightly ironic nature of the one drop of blood, which is what is used later on to bring Shylock to his knees. This next quotation is also in the courtroom. Bassanio says, "I would lose all, which of course means yes. I would lose all, yes, sacrifice them all here to this devil to deliver you." Now, you've got to remember that his wife, Portia, is in the courtroom too, as Balthazar. He doesn't know that, of course, but we do. And he's basically happily offered to sacrifice her so that this man can live. Now, it's a complicated idea, because I don't think he really means it, but that's certainly what Portia hears, and she says, I don't think your wife would thank you for saying that. Balthazar asks Bassanio for the ring on his finger. He doesn't want the 3,000 ducats that he's been offered. He just wants the ring off of Bassanio's finger, which of course could be Portia, because of course she is Balthazar, testing her husband and pushing him to the limit. And he does say the right things. He says there's more depends on this, meaning the ring, than value. In other words, if I give this ring to you, there will be much more consequence than just the loss of what it might be worth, because it means something, it symbolises something, as rings often do. It's a symbol of a promise that they've had, and of course this play is about bonds and promises, and if he takes it off, it is as good as breaking his own promise. Bassanio continues to try and explain this. Good sir, that's a very polite way of talking, isn't it? This ring was given by my wife, and when she put it on, she made me vow that I should neither sell nor give nor lose it. So we have she made me. So there we go. There's an order, if you like, that she insists. And then we have that rule of 3 right there. Neither sell nor give nor lose it. Well, he's about to give it away. You might say he's lost it too. Okay, and in a way he's also sold it, because it is in replacement for the 3,000 ducats that the lawyer doesn't want. So in many ways he is breaking this promise. Portia makes Bassanio suffer. By the time they get back to Belmont, she makes him really pay for giving his ring away, just as Graziano has. But eventually, of course, he discovers that she was the doctor, and he gets one of the last lines of the play when he says, "Sweet doctor, you shall be my bedfellow. When I'm absent, then lie with my wife." So he's basically telling her that they are going to be companions, that they're going to be man and wife. But I suppose the word fellow is also a pun, because fellow means man. A fellow is a man. And I suppose he's just making a joke about the fact that the doctor was a man, Balthazar. But the last little bit, when I'm absent, then lie with my wife, is just a reference to the fact that he's worked that bit out too. When I'm not here, you're going to be on your own. And it sort of helps anyone who hasn't really worked out what the plot is, that maybe they've missed a bit. Who was that doctor? Who was that man? He's just clearing it up. It's Shakespeare just tying up a few loose ends. But it's worth mentioning that Bassanio gets one of the final lines of the play, and it is a line which brings harmony, which is what you need with comedy. Shakespeare needed the last few lines of his plays to resolve things, to make everything all right, so that his audience could go home happy.